we need to make things work here. We have one shot.
The narrative for the guard was that these guys are like maybe onliners a little bit.
And I could tell like they were really, really tired. I was exhausted.
How do you go about preparing for something like this?
Split 1 was tumultuous, to say the least. We were looking at boot camp, and we couldn't get a boot camp.
You guys lose a crazy overtime map to start the series.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's been like the phrase I've been saying, like, guys, we got to dominate everything.
Time becoming an issue. Shock dart sent out preemptively. No one home. Start gets placed. It's a nebula. EU tries to hang on to it, but no! It's Trent to find the final kill! It's been 471 days since the rookies made it to Reykjavik, but today is the day where veterans qualify for VCT.
I am joined today by JoshRT, the head coach for the newly ascended The Guard team. Thank you for joining me, first of all. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's been a couple days since we won, so I'm just back to decompressing a little bit after that win.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to this interview, man.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I've got a lot of questions for you about the whole guard process and all of that. But I want to start you off with just something a little bit more basic, something I like to ask a lot of the coaches that I talk to, which is basically like, what do you view the job of a coach as being? What sort of role do you play on the team? Because I know there's kind of like a wide variety of things that you can bring to the table.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm the head coach, and I'm a head coach specifically for a Valorant team. The way I view coaching is that I'm a person that manages like improvements for whatever goal or field of their choosing. So in the case of a Valorant team coach versus say a personal player coach, I may look at like team fundamentals, team identity, principles of play of a which just means like a agreed way of playing the game amongst a group, and so on and so forth. Like it could be the strategic depth of our playbook or map pool, practice goals and whatnot. So I wear a lot of hats, but all in the goal of trying to improve the team.
Sure.
So that's what I do. Yeah.
Makes sense. And I was doing a little bit of research for talking to you, and I noticed that when you first came, so I guess for anybody that doesn't know who you were a Counter-Strike pro for quite a long time, and transitioned over to Valorant during the early stages, and you played Valorant for a bit before becoming a coach.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed that your first team in Valorant was called Prospects, and then back in CS, you were also playing on a team that was called Prospects. So it seems like you're kind of into this whole like maybe discovering talent, developing talent. Is that something that you've always kind of been interested in? Is like finding the prospects and helping them become?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no.
Okay.
It was actually out of necessity since I wanted to compete and I wasn't really skilled enough to really hang at the top level. So I kind of just used my skill set as somewhat of a leader, and try to make winning teams at the tier 2 level. I wasn't exactly a pro. I never got signed to a pro contract, but I did win money in like the FPLs and whatnot. But honestly, I didn't have the skill, like the mechanical skill or the necessary leadership skills back then to really pull off getting into the pro league. So yeah, so I ended up out of necessity finding and developing players, which eventually they all kind of outgrew me. And there's a whole roster of players like that, and I had to keep finding players. So once I started doing that a lot, I eventually liked the whole process, and I kind of leveraged that experience in my first shot at coaching.
Okay, cool. And that first shot of coaching was with Energy, right?
Yeah,
that was the first one. I want to talk to you a little bit about that transition of going from being a player to a coach. How did you kind of manage that? Like, what did it feel like to kind of like hang up the mouse as it were, and like step into that role of being like, okay, I'm no longer just like kind of like friends and collaborators with the players on the team, but I actually have to like kind of be in charge of them. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean that topic is actually so deep, because I know some players want to be coaches, and when I embarked on that endeavor, it was kind of thrusted on me. I got messaged out of the blue by Energy's GM and some of the players on Energy knew me for a very long time since my name was in the scene for so long. I really got the shot, and they ended up giving me the shot. They were in a transition period themselves with Chet leaving, and they needed a coach ASAP for, I think it was like one of the brackets, the qualifier brackets for VCT at the time. But for transitioning from player to coach, I think one thing you have to be mindful of is, well, I underestimated the depth in coaching. How much you have to increase your skill set of just learning to deal with players, kind of look beyond yourself and reflect to try to help them out, really. And it's really hard to do when prior to that, as a player, you only really had to think about yourself and your contribution to your team. And now you have to look a little bit bigger in the bigger picture and see how everything fits together. Fortunately, I was an IGL in my tier 2 rosters, so I kind of had that easier transition, and I think IGLs have an easier time to transition to coaching because you're kind of a player coach yourself.
Right.
Like you got to like make sure your vision is executed in the server. But yeah, that transition was honestly kind of tough. You have to lose your ego a little bit. You have to stomach the reality that you can't pursue your dream of being a pro player. Something I tried to do for so long, never got it. But now I'm kind of living vicariously to my teammates. So
sure,
it's kind of working out. It's kind of working out.
Cool. Did you find that you had to kind of like manage your relationships with players a little bit? Because I know that there's always kind of like this, you know, the adage in esports is like, oh, this team just went out and they like got their friend to come like quote unquote coach them, but it's like kind of a coach in name only. Was that sort of like something you had to figure out? Is like, how do I actually, you know, not just be like friends with the players, but also kind of like be there? Because I mean, you're kind of their boss to some extent, but it's not as easy as being like, do this, and they listen to you, right?
Yeah. So to talk about that experience for me, because I completely agree, there's going to be a moat or a gap between player to coach and hell, even IGL to coach. And I would say the IGL is kind of in between the players as a team to coach, and is purposeful, at least for me. Something I had to learn in Energy. Because to be honest, that whole adage of like bringing a friend on to coach, I wasn't exactly part of their. I wasn't exactly friends with those players. They just knew me. But it was kind of like my name was around there, so they recommended. It was recommended. They tried me out. They liked what I provided, which I'm grateful for the opportunity. But their previous coach, and I would say Chet's style is more about being their friend, but also like kind of their boss at the same time. At the time, I didn't have a coach identity, and I tried to embark on that approach, but I kind of failed to play that line, and it was really hard to set accountability measures, especially with the roster they had. It was a star-studded roster, right? At the time,
Psalm and EU and those guys, right?
Yeah, it was like Android and at the time Daps, and so they were big names, very accomplished in their own right. Some more than others, and a lot of them have like a lot going on. So as like a fresh coach, it was really hard for me to like set some accountability from the get-go, because I actually trialed as an analyst before getting signed as a head coach.
Okay.
So it kind of ran like I wasn't like introduced as like, hey, this is gonna be your coach. Like I was their analyst. So I approached it differently. Like, hey, this is something you guys could try, or like, you know, I kind of use that kind of language instead of just like really managing the whole thing. And I think it's kind of important if you're a head coach from the get-go to set expectations and standards, set the culture, so to speak, or else it's really hard to make that relationship work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. At the same time, I pride myself in being friendly with the players. Like I consider all my players my friends, even though they're 10 years younger than me.
How's that feel these days?
Yeah, I mean, you just got to get used to the culture, you know, like listen to their music a little bit, just get used to their lingo, and just go along with it, right? But once I bring that lingo outside of work, I'm like, wait, I sound like I'm 20, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need to have that gap for sure to make sure like I can push them. And it's what they want, honestly.
Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about then transitioning to working with the guard, because obviously it's a much different, I would assume it's a much different environment. A lot of younger guys. I mean, they had a decent amount of experience working with MCE before that, and they obviously made the one land, right?
Yeah.
But it's not quite the same thing as like Daps. I mean, he's the coach for Liquid now in Counter-Strike, and he's been, in the scene for a long time. So I'm sure that was a little bit different. Like you had a little bit more maybe seniority over these guys. Like were they more willing to listen to you, or what was kind of like coming into the guard like for the first time?
Do you mind if I talk about like the differences like from energy to guard?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So Daps left, I didn't really have a coach model to model myself off of. So lack of identity of just trying to like figure out who I am as a coach. That came later in my second year when I introduced 2 or 3 people into my staff, and that's Zix, Edward, and Demar's the Rover.
This was still at Energy, right?
Yeah, that's Energy.
Okay.
And back then, I'll be honest, like I don't think I was a good coach. I was in over my head, and mostly because the systems that I had wasn't super fleshed out. So like once you're in season, it's really hard to improve what you have, right? Your match is next week. Well, what do you need to fix? Well, you only have like 2 days to fix it, 3 days to fix it.
Right.
On top of so many other factors. So I didn't really have a really good system in place, and I think you need a system to have repeatable success. So going into the guard in my off season, that's mainly what I worked on, to make sure I have a fleshed out system, something that I can rely on, a coaching model, so to speak, so that I can teach these kids a good way to play the game. And going to the guard, I'm super grateful that Matt was their previous coach. They have the best start ever as pro players. If you look at their careers, that's essentially for some of them, their second team, but that's essentially their like the first major team, I think. And so the foundations were set. I think Matt, with understanding that they had a limited collective knowledge about the game, taught the game in a way that was immediately effective. Because in esports, it is win now. Unfortunately, like it's really hard to think long term. Like you gotta make things work. You gotta qualify for the next thing or whatnot. So he taught them in a way where it's like pretty simple. Not much nuance into decision making. A lot of set plays, set strats, and if there's some decision making, it's like pretty simple. Back then they were known as like they would constantly double peak together, the 3-2-1 team.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I remember that.
Yeah. And I was able to listen to their comms, their VODs before, like going into the guard, just to see like what am I working with. And one of the key decision makers actually left the team, and that was Saya player.
Right.
Yeah. So like as an entry player, like surprisingly, he's the foreign player, the Korean player on the team. He knew enough English, but like he would tailor the entry decisions subtly in a way that I'm not sure if the players knew that he was doing that, but he would constantly do that. And that now that's gone. Like, oh wow, like some of the nuance decision making is gone, and I needed to. Well, that was like the first thing I wanted to work on coming into the guard. Like, hey, I want to work on our mid rounding. I want to work on our decision making. Like back then, this worked, but as you guys face like the better teams, it stopped working, right? Like, because they can dismantle that. They kind of know what your game plan is. So like case in point, losing to Optic at Reykjavik, and then I mean that's not the only thing. I would say like the lack of experience definitely bit them in their ass there. But also playing against Paper X, they were at the time super pressuring.
Right.
So how do you deal with all that? How do you develop more of like the playbook to deal with different styles? So that's something I brought like coming into the guard.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I guess one other question I had about that kind of transition to going to the guard was what was it like coming into kind of like an already established team? Obviously, Saya left. Were you the one that brought in Tex, or?
Yeah. I recruited techs. Yeah.
Okay. But there was probably like sort of an established culture with like the core 4 guys that were still there, I would imagine. What was that like, kind of having to step into what I would assume is kind of like a group of friends already, and you're kind of like the outsider initially, but you come in and kind of like figure out how to work with them. Was that difficult at all, or was it just like MCE set these guys up for success and you could kind of just like slot in and be like, all right, you know how to listen to a coach, let's do this?
I think it's not as easy as people would bring it up to be, because that means, first of all, big shoes to fill. Right. Matt went on to also being successful at Cloud9, so he's a really good coach in his own right. And that just means like I have higher expectations to fill. They expect more. And I can't just come in unprepared and not know what I'm talking about. I needed to provide value as soon as possible for these players, because now they know a little bit more. They know what to expect, and they have higher expectations of themselves. But fortunately, like the existing team chemistry was great. Ian or Tex fit like a glove. I would even say, like, I think Ian and Jake, they're roommates right now. Like, I think they're like best friends. I think I can say that. But yeah, it was hard in some aspects and easy in that, like, the players already got along with each other. So I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
Makes sense. I am not super sure about the background of a lot of the players on the guard. Obviously, you come from a Counter-Strike background. And Tex was a Counter-Strike player. I do know that. What sort of differences between Counter-Strike and Valorant have you really noticed as like being like pronounced things that you have to focus on specifically in Valorant that maybe just like either didn't exist in Counter-Strike or like taken for granted in the previous game?
It's been a while since I looked at Counter-Strike. Since I mean, I've been playing this game or coaching this game for the past 3 years. Or since it came out. And I know with Counter-Strike they added the whole like you drop your grenades and whatnot. So that added a huge strategic depth that I never experienced. But they're both tactical FPS games, right? And the fundamentals are generally the same. You want to keep your man advantages. How do you play your man disadvantages? Just map control, in your defaults, and all those like similar tactical goals, like how do you play your crossfires and whatnot, and utility. But I would think with Counter-Strike there's more utility, and they all have the same ones, so you can mask your intentions a lot more, right?
Okay.
You can, and I think with the grenade drops, like, you can literally give it to like one dude, and you can just refresh like the same smokes or something. Whereas Valorant, there's limited amount of utility. You have to keep in mind of utility timings. Everyone has refresh cycles, and there's utility that gives you passive or active info, something that's not in Counter-Strike.
Right.
There's also untradeability mechanics like the jet chamber. That's also not in Counter-Strike. So there's more one and done spots, is what they say, which would have been tradable, but now you can't.
Right, and every agent that gets spotted is like actually real info, right? Because it means, this is a look that they're giving us because the sky is here, or something like that, for sure.
Right. The agents, the compositions play a huge part of Valorant. It kind of promotes a certain style of play, whereas in Counter-Strike, you just don't know. I mean, the team's identity kind of show the style of play, but everyone has the same tools. But in Valorant, it's not so much the case.
How do you like that? Do you like the whole sort of like hero shooter elements that Valorant has brought, where it's like you can kind of be creative within the general tac shooter like structure, but you can, this comp is going to play super aggressive, or this comp's going to be info denial, this comp's going to be more reliant on individual plays, that kind of stuff. How do you view like creating an agent composition?
You kind of have to look at the skill sets of the players, like the players that you have, and kind of tailor the comps to that. I mean, there are meta comps, and some maps you can't really stray away from it because it just has so many solutions for the problems that you will commonly face. I kind of like approach everything in that kind of a model where there's problems to solve. Where are my solutions? Can this comp provide those solutions easily? And then I will look at my players. But there are maps where sometimes you're just limited by your Asian pool, and you might have to go with a so-called subpar meta comp or subpar comp compared to the meta. But you can make it work. Like I think with everything, you can just, if you really think about it and work with the constraints that you have, you'll be surprised by the solutions you come up with.
Sure. Yeah. Like you can smoke this, you could cage it, you could just pull back a star. There's a lot of ways to get across certain areas, and yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, instead of just like, oh fuck, man. Oh, sorry. Shoot, man. Like, dude, we need an extra smoke or something, or like, well, you can figure things out. Like, and if it's not the utility, you can use your mechanics to get out of it. Right. So there's always something. And that makes my job very interesting, and something that's why I kind of like chose Valorant, I think.
Okay, cool. So you actually were kind of interested in that when you moved from Counter-Strike to Valorant. That's cool. All right, let's get a little bit deeper into the guard stuff. I'm kind of curious to hear about like this run, this season, working your way towards Ascension. So maybe go back to split number 1. You guys are coming in as one of the favorites. Everybody's kind of predicting you and M80 as the top 2 teams, I would imagine. How was sort of like the league system for you guys? There's been so much Valorant. I keep losing track.
I'm actually looking up VLR right now. Let's see our matches.
Yeah. But so I mean the league system, you guys play what, like a couple is like you play a game and then another game the next day and then another game the next day, and then there was like a 4-day break or something like that. Was that how it was, or was it like?
No, it was a weekly. It was very similar to VCT last year. It was weekly online games, usually on the weekend. For us, it was like middle of the week because they didn't want to coincide with the actual VCT Americas. But yeah, it's just weekly games. So I prefer that format because you get to prepare. I can predictably just like schedule everything out. Like the first day back, VOD review, fix your mistakes. Mm-hmm. Second day, and then first day back. It's a break, but I usually don't have a break. I need to prepare for the week, see what kind of goals or practice goals I need to set compared to for the team that we're playing. What do we need to focus on in terms of like map pool and whatnot? And then, it's predictable.
Right.
Not a fan of like back-to-back games. That puts a lot of stress on the players and the coaches or coach to prep everything. But yeah, it was weekly. Split 1, and then there was like a mid-season face-off,
right,
where we lost to M80 and G2. Small break, and then it went to split 2. It was a long season.
Yeah, I can imagine. Let's talk a little bit about the mid-season face-off, because obviously you guys were pretty successful in split 1 of NA, and then you go in and things kind of seem to be going pretty well. You beat FaZe, beat Oxygen, come up against M80. It's like, I think everybody was kind of just looking at your matchup against M80 as sort of like a coin flip, whoever shows up on that day. Was that how it felt playing them in the early season, or just in general throughout the season?
I always felt like we had the edge, but in this matchup, they actually they beat us in the map pool. They picked their fracture, and at the time our fracture was kind of weak. We weren't really sure what comp we wanted to run, and we actually ran like a sentinel-less double controller comp focused around the jet, and it didn't work out. It didn't work out. So they exploited that, and they had the momentum going into the third map, and we screwed up the last two. Like the last 2 rounds consistently. Like if you look at our losses, it's always been like the last 2 rounds where we would make a crucial mistake and they would take the series.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you lose to M80 in the upper final, and then you're up against G2, who was kind of like they finished like 4th or something like that in the actual split, I feel like. Oh wait, never mind.
No, they got second. They got second over. Oh, in the regular season split.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah,
no.
third.
In split one, they were doing pretty well.
Yeah.
So losing to G2 though, I think was kind of surprising to most people. Were they just kind of on one at that point? Because obviously they ended up kind of tanking for the rest of the season. But at that point, you know, I guess the 2-1 loss, I feel like was that like a low point in the season for you guys of being like, you know?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, because this wasn't mentioned, this was like shortly after the layoffs at the guard.
Right.
So like there was a lot. Split one was tumultuous to say the least, because that event happened in the middle of the season, and it was kind of up to me to make sure like we were focused on our goal. Make sure that despite the uncertainty and doubt that we had of like what's going on, like we're not sure what will happen, that we would just keep chugging along. And it did mark for some, I would say, not the best practices or practice weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that's like the reason why we lost. I think it did play a factor, but I would say there's some game plan reasons in losing against G2. I thought we had a really good game plan on split. We had a really good read on how to counter what they're doing, their defaults and whatnot. And it was one of those problems where you kind of try to predict their adjustment, but they didn't actually adjust. And then we kind of kill our own advantage.
Overcook it a little bit.
Yeah. And so we lost map 1. We lost map 1. We beat map 2, and map 3 was down to the wire. Like again, last 2 rounds we kind of screwed that up. But yeah, after those losses, we talked. It was definitely a low point, but we took the lessons from that and tried to just make sure we up our mental resilience. I think losses like these, especially in the middle of the season, where it doesn't end our season, super helpful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just shows that we got reality check. We got work to do, guys. We're not the best. We're not the best at the time. These teams, all at any given time, they can beat us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I do want to talk a little bit about the whole the Cronky group kind of like pulling back from esports a little bit, because I'd kind of forgotten. I knew I wanted to ask you about that, but I'd kind of forgotten exactly when that happened. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of like the mental side of esports in general, and I can imagine that having this sort of, you know, your safety net essentially be like, I don't know, are we going to be here a couple of months from now? I assume that for you as like one of the last pieces of staff left around the team as well is probably kind of an interesting experience for you. How much like management of that did you have to do? Were you constantly having to kind of like reassure people, like, you know, just focus on these goals and things will work out, or what was that like?
Yeah, exactly that. Just to correct some things.
Sure.
They didn't pull out esports. It was a massive layoff. But the competitive operations kept going. So very grateful that they were still able to keep that going. But yeah, it still was pretty tough. Although I had the bigger picture of like what's going on in the scene, and like I was aware of like just the economics of it all. It's tough to be in tier 2 in Valorant or any esport, actually. But the players didn't really see the big picture, so it was really scary for them, I think. And I had to make sure, just reassure them that like, hey, no matter what happens, like we're such a good group, like we can make this work. And the whole season I've been promoting, like, let's just be problem solvers, guys. Like, it's just another problem to solve. It's not a big deal. Well, it was, but we can make it a small deal, or we can just put that on the side and just focus on one thing at a time, which was, hey, let's just fix our Lotus, let's fix our split, let's fix our, you know, fracture, because we lost M80. Like, it was just being short-sighted helped, I think. And yeah, just focused on the job.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And coming into Split 2, I was always kind of curious about this. How much did these games really matter to you guys? Because I feel like after Split 1, weren't the points kind of weird? Where like if you finished in like the top 5 or 6 in Split 1, you were kind of just good for the playoffs in Split 2.
Yeah.
Did you kind of feel like that? Was there a little bit less pressure for Split 2? Or
no, because of all of what was happening.
Mhm.
Yeah. So although we all see the comments online like, oh, you know, guards like they clinch playoffs, like they don't have to do anything. We didn't feel that way. We felt like we always had to prove ourselves, make sure like, yo, we are worthy of keeping around and investing in.
Yeah.
We wanted to stay as favorites. We wanted to make sure we have the mental edge on every team. We wanted to dominate. Yeah, that's been like the phrase I've been saying, like, guys, we got to dominate every team. Let's have that mental edge. Like even going to, I think we played like M80 and hold on. When did we play M80? Okay, no, that's Split 1. I mean, like we going into the G2 game, right? The last game, there was no reason for us to try so hard, but we wanted to give them that 0-5, right? And we wanted to, prove a point. And I think it showed. We 2-0'd every team except Moist, and that was the game that I had to sub in. It would have. I think it would have been 2-0 across the board. We would have been a perfect season.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How'd that feel running it back for one series?
Oh man, it made me think like, damn, I don't want to coach anymore, guys. Sub me in, man. That was fun. I never got to experience that as a player, so I'm happy that I got to experience that. Sad that for the circumstances that occurred in, but yeah.
Cool. Okay, so then you guys kind of cruised through Split 2. You had the playoffs come in, beat FaZe, and then you go up against Moist, who was probably the most impressive, most improved team from Split 1 to Split 2, I would say, in my opinion.
I agree.
And they beat you guys 2-0 in a couple pretty close matches. What was sort of the mind state of the team and the message from you to them at that point? Because this is when it actually matters, right? This is the playoffs to go to essentially the Ascension tournament. Kind of everything is on the line at this point. Yeah.
At the time, we were looking at bootcamp, and we couldn't get a bootcamp in time, and we were playing that match online in LA, against a team that was boot camping in the optic facility. So they had pretty good advantages going in. But I would say our heads were in that game. It really wasn't. It felt like we were hesitating a lot, making a lot of mistakes. And we tried our best to get our heads back into the game. But you know how this game goes. Like if certain comms slip and some rounds fall in their favor, it just is so hard to dig out of that hole. But yeah, after that weekend, after that loss, we got together and talked, and we were like, man, we need to make things work here. We have one shot here. Let's fly to Minnesota. Let's get this done.
Okay. So
the playoffs were in 2 weekends. So that was the end of the first weekend. Yeah.
Okay, so then you guys actually got a boot camp together. You all grouped up and played the rest of the playoffs from like where you could, fist bump each other in close proximity. I
mean, we were already together. Just keep that in mind. It was more like we need to make sure we even the playing field.
Gotcha.
So like all these teams were, they're putting significant amount of money to get to central locations, and it's no secret that's how you make sure you have the best pings for online play. So we decided like that next weekend we're gonna go fly to, actually it was V1, the V1 facility. Shout out to them. And we were able to make a lower bracket run, just going undefeated actually until the finals.
I'm back 3-0 against the Moguls on the rematch. That probably felt pretty good at that point, setting yourselves up for against M80. Definitely a highlight. And then obviously the seeding game doesn't really matter. You guys are both in Ascension.
We wanted to win that. It's just we had 3. Like I said, I don't like back-to-back games. We had 3 3 days in a row, very high pressure, high stakes. Like literally, we thought like our futures were on the line, our jobs were on the line.
Yep.
It really was. And funny enough, I have a call out in one of the terms that we use is Astralis, and it just means like, hey, let's play our man advantages. Let's start playing the fundamentals really well. Close out the round. Everyone starts updating their comms, crossfires, and whatnot. Right? Astralis is the team that was that had that CSGO dynasty. They almost like had perfect Counter-Strike play. So we renamed that to Rent. We're playing for rent money, guys. Like, so, so it was high pressure, high stakes, and I mean, we prepared all year for this moment, and so the pressure wasn't overwhelming for us. We embraced the pressure. We actually play a lot better with the pressure, and it showed. We 2-0'd every team. After we won against the Moguls, there was a relief.
Mm-hmm.
And
like an adrenaline dump, I would imagine.
Adrenaline dump. Some of the players, they were super tired, and like going into the MAA game, they couldn't really like lock into that second gear, the next gear to really like fight for it. Like we won map 1, and I could tell like they were really really tired. I was exhausted, and and that's enough to just tie it, like push it over the edge, and we lost the last 2 maps, 11-13. Down to the wire, but we knew like after that, like if the conditions are even again, like we would take it for sure.
Okay, cool. So ultimately, a pretty good confidence builder over the last little bit of that playoffs.
Yeah,
awesome. And then you guys have a bit of a break, right? Because the actual Ascension tournament, you guys have to go down to Brazil. There's a bit of a time off. So how do you go about sort of preparing for something like this, where you got to travel now, you have a bit of time to maybe rethink some things, reimagine a couple of strats, that kind of stuff. What's your approach as a coach? And you don't have to give away too much, because although you have a bit of time, so you're going to be able to reinvent this as well. So you can give me a little bit of secret sauce. But what's your sort of approach to kind of like tailoring those next? I guess it's like basically 3 weeks before the real test kind of comes up.
Yeah, so I pride myself in game planning really well. And so like going into that tournament, I made sure to look at the field, meaning like the 6 teams are going, or 5 other teams are going, and just seeing what they have, what kind of map pool they possess, what are their priorities. And then obviously looking through all the VODs, and I did a lot of like prep work leading up to that event. You guys saw it on camera. Like I have stacks of paper just ready to see like what they'll pull out. And identified some of the weaknesses in some of their map pools, tried to tailor our practice in strengthening some certain parts of ours, and made sure like we had a good strategy going into winning that whole thing. So like those 2 weeks was making sure we fixed our mistakes, added new wrinkles to our playbook, so that we can pull it out during the matches. And because the matches are, some of them are like back to back, and instead of just like making it, let's say, like making sure that there's enough like strategic variance in between the games so that other teams can't game plan against us that well. A lot of that prep work was in those 2 weeks.
Cool. And you are still the only coach for the team at this point, right? Do you have an analyst, or was it just you and the guys doing the work?
No analyst, no assistant coach. Although I wanted one. I actually want to shout out to one analyst that was working pro bono in the first split. And because of the layoffs, like we couldn't actually get it. Like we were looking to get the guy, and then layoffs happened, and I'm like, damn. Sorry, man. Like I was trying my best, and his name was Saber. Yeah, he helped me a lot in the first split, but largely this was unsupported.
Gotcha.
So shout out to Saber. For me to stay on top of things, I had to make sure I delegate my work really well to the players, and just make sure like they know they're part of the process as much as I am, right? And that ended up being one of our strengths, actually, that they had so much going into it. Like I joked around to Mike or Net that he was basically my assistant coach in Sao Paulo. Like when I tweeted about it. Like when we're anti-stratting and looking at the VODs, like, hey, I actually talked to Mike a lot about, what he thought about our defensive setups compared to their attack style or whatnot. Yeah, and then it showed. Like he was able to predict a lot of things, and with Jake making the pistols and game planning for each team, and it showed our attack sides were insane. We were able to dismantle so many teams. But
yeah, I can imagine that ends up being a pretty big advantage, and probably sets these players up for like tons of success because they're so involved in the strategic side of things. Because I mean, I just know that some teams are very like coach top heavy, doing a lot of the work and like the coaching staff. And I mean, I have a little bit of experience coaching in Valorant. I worked with like an FA team trying to qualify for the tier 2 league that you were in.
Yeah, I remember.
Got pretty close.
Yeah.
And I just remember how on that team there was like a lot of sort of collaborative work, and I think it can be really good for a team. Everybody bringing stuff to the table. Awesome. Okay, so you guys get to Brazil, and I guess actually before we actually get into the Ascension tournament, you mentioned that these guys are really good under pressure, and you're going to this super high pressure environment. I think it's a little bit interesting just because I thought the narrative for the Guard after losing their first international land was that these guys are like maybe onliners a little bit.
Yeah.
So was any of that true? Did you guys kind of have to break that narrative, or was it just something that was kind of overblown because it was like first land nerves and these guys were actually kind of like Lanimal or like pressure demons? They just needed a couple more times of being experienced to that.
They would admit it, and I knew, like, yeah, the pressure got to them. They excelled in the online play, and they didn't get another chance after that. Unfortunately, right? Split 2, they had like 1 win. I actually ended their season with energy. Like he used like 1v5 and all that. And LCQ, they got to the finals and lost to 100 Thieves 0-3.
Right.
So
kind of
that was
another pressure match, right?
Right. Yeah. So like they had their failures coming in. And that's something I was talking about. Like, hey, remember those failures, man. In a way that you need to push yourself, because in practice, if you push yourself hard, it makes competition really easy. And they would say like, dude, these VOD reviews, man, like stop talking about like this decision, that decision. Like, well, it's on video, man. We're gonna discuss it. Let's focus on like what's the better decision here. What are we looking for? What factors are we like? What variables are we looking at? Let's be smarter together. One of the goals coming into this season was just increase the group intelligence of the team. And if you notice, like all the players talking, they all kind of say the same stuff because that's all we talk about really in the practice room. So that, married with the fact that they understand that they have a lot to prove, made them even more resilient when it came to these high pressure matches. I think, yeah, a lot more resilient compared to these other teams, I think. And I kind of banked on that going into this tournament. I knew that our season will hinge on that, and I made sure they knew that as well. And it's better to do the hard shit now, hard stuff now. Sorry.
You can curse. It's totally fine.
Yeah, my bad. Like that. Make sure practice is hard. Like, and yeah, that's really important. Don't take practice easy.
And that's kind of, I mean, that's almost like anti-NA practice theory, I guess. Like NA esports in general, Counter-Strike and even Valorant is sort of known for your scrim quality. It's going to be a little bit up and down depending on who you're playing. So that's cool to hear.
Trust me, like I'm always fighting against the grain. And it's definitely not a popular approach. Like even the players would be like, well, this team and that team, they don't do that. Like, why do we have to do it like this? Like, well, I'm glad the Guard empowers me in a certain way. And I'm glad, actually, the fact that these guys are so early in their careers that I can impart that kind of philosophy. And it's something like I kind of just embody myself. Like, I think you need to have that delayed gratification. You know, like, you just got to work, man. Like, but I'm hoping that they have long and successful careers because of this, with this mindset.
Yeah, I believe they probably will based on how their careers have started and the trajectory that they're on for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the actual Ascension tournament. You guys come in, you're in a group with 00 Nation and NZ or 9Z. How would you sort of like power rank the 6 teams coming in from your personal study of them as you were game planning for stuff?
Within the group or just all 6 teams?
I guess all 6 teams, and from that we can kind of infer how you felt about your group.
I would say it was M80 number 1, besides us, of course. Like excluding us, it was gonna be M80, then Union. I actually rated 9Z pretty high.
Okay.
I liked that they had very interesting comps, and it was interesting the game plan against it. And it's always a question mark whether or not your players would be okay with like the weird comps they're facing versus like a meta comp. I always like meta comps because you're so used to it. You've seen it in scrims, got so many reps. But hey, have you guys seen a chamber and a raise on Ascent?
Right.
Let's make sure we, like that. We got to make. I feel confident coming in, but sometimes there's that little like question mark. Like, will my guys perform under that kind of condition? So I kind of rated like 9Z, kind of high, because they dismantled Fusion. They in their LATAM finals, they 3-0'd Fusion and it wasn't even close. So saw them pretty highly. And then Double Nation kind of like snuck in. They had like a Cinderella story for themselves. Like they were what was their ranking in Split 1? It was like really low. And then they made a run in Split 2. It's kind of like Moist or something, where Moist wasn't like the sickest in Split 1. Like one of those teams. They got in, but they were definitely number 2 in Brazil, or like lower than Union. Union was by far the best team in Brazil.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So our group, I couldn't underestimate anyone. Because it's also in foreign lands in a way. Like we're in Brazil, and so it's going to be tilted in their favor. We're playing in their studio. They're already used to the setup. And our first match was against a Brazilian team. So I was holding my breath in that one. That first half was like actually the most nervous I would say throughout the whole tournament.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, that makes sense. Totally different environment. The setup was like really close. It's kind of like old school esports, right? You could kind of just like stare at the players across the stage from you real close.
We loved it actually. It was so fun. It was so fun.
Awesome. Did you have anything in particular that you kind of like helped prepare them with for like the LAN environment? Any tips that you gave the guys to like deal with, obviously there's like the white noise, the crowd, the different PCs. What was sort of like your pregame, I guess, like rituals for success for the team?
For the team. Sounds like 2 questions there. For the LAN environment, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to go to the Ludwig tournament at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
So we got invited, and there was a lot of questions amongst the team, like, "Hey, do you really want to like show our strats and stuff like that going into our like challenger split before we even started? Isn't that like strategically dumb?" And they would hear opinions from like other coaches because the guy, like, we're in LA, so we get to hear opinions, and we know a lot of the franchise teams here, and some of them expressed like, that's a really bad idea. Why would you give away your or show your strats on VOD? I, again, with like the focus on mental resilience, right? We're problem solvers. I don't care if it's like on video. Like we can always innovate and just get better. That I wanted to go to the Ludwig game and just get used to playing in already like in a high pressure environment. So we banked that experience playing together like that. Like we knew how it feels to it's the little things, just going in the match room, setting up quickly, playing, finishing, going back to the ready room, that little in between talk, and then going back again, and we actually took some map losses there. But we took the whole thing, right? So that was a positive experience for us. And so going into the Brazilian land, we kind of leaned on that a little bit, So didn't feel as new to us. But the white noise for sure was an interesting development. I had to ask a few coaches around the league, like what's their take on like how do you deal with the white noise? And it just really means like you just need to you could probably take a few steps extra. Yeah. But then the studio was actually like perfect sound.
Okay.
On the stage it's a little bit more jarring. Like you can't really hear as much.
Okay. Gotcha. Awesome. All right. So then you guys end up taking first seed in your group, and you get a bye into the upper semifinals, which is pretty cool. That's always nice.
Yeah.
Less work, less prep work, especially for you. I'm sure that you had a bunch of kind of like you finish the map, and then you're just like right into the VOD dungeon like pretty quickly.
Yeah.
To prepare for the next team. Okay. So upper semifinals, you match up against M80. And things are probably in your favor a little bit at this point because they're coming into basically a back-to-back. You guys have the little bit of a break. What was your outlook on this match in the upper semi?
I would argue that we didn't have an advantage actually. They after finding like the strength of these teams when we played our group stage, we knew that M80 would beat 9Z. Pretty convincingly.
Okay.
And I actually think it's more of an advantage to play because we're just waiting and you can't scrim there. There's no teams that you can scrim.
Right.
Yeah. And we're just in a small practice room, just trying to keep our form and just, we're just waiting the whole time. And that kind of sucks. Like, and the prep already was done. Like I said, I was like pretty prepped going into the event. I had to update a few things given what they showed in their group stage, but we were ready and we just wanted to play. We're itching to play. I actually think it's one of those like few occurrences that we wanted the back-to-back days just because there's actually nothing to do while we waited.
It's like a momentum thing almost where it's like you just want to get into the rhythm of just play a game at that point.
Yeah, but if there was like scrims available, like the break is a welcome. That day break is a welcome thing, or if we were brave enough to go out and explore Sao Paulo a little bit more, like we would have enjoyed that. But it was all just sitting in the studio just waiting for the next matchup. It was pretty boring for some of the players. But yeah, going into that game, I felt like I beat them in the vetoes and setting it up all split two in this matchup, change our bans, and then they kind of fell into that trap, so we 2-0'd them there.
Nice.
Pretty convincingly,
yeah. Yeah, I remember those games. Then you go in and you're playing against the Union upper final in Brazil, kind of like the hot team. It seems like they had a lot of energy, and you guys lose a crazy overtime map to start the series.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. How'd that one slip away from you, and then how did you recover from it?
We had a certain game plan against the Union, and I would say it's a little bit my fault in not making our reads a little bit more simpler, because they're actually kind of easy to read. It's just a matter of like recognizing what they're doing and making sure we don't fall into their traps, and we fell into their traps. And so after that scrappy loss, we go into the back room and we're actually mad at ourselves. Like, how did that slip? We were actually mad at like how we kind of ignored our own game plan in a way that we shouldn't have strayed away from it. Like, oh wow, let's just stick to the game plan. It should work, and we can easily dismantle them. And yeah, it showed. The next two maps it showed. Yeah.
That Pearl were pretty smooth sailing from there on out. Okay, so then you go to the grand final and you have another little break, right? Because you guys moved to a different setup at this point.
Three-day break. It was too long. It was so long, man.
Yeah, and there's no scrimming, obviously.
Yeah.
How are you keeping the team in it and focused for that time? I mean, we're talking Zoomers, we're talking different country, nothing to do. Like,
yeah.
How do you get these guys ready for the biggest match of their life, basically?
Man, it was I went through so many different emotions in terms of like how do I approach this break? Because some players, they're overconfident, like, yeah, we got this in the bag. At the same time, like, guys, you don't know what the conditions are like in the grand finals. We might be playing the Union. We might be playing M80. They're coming off like stage experience that's different from the studio experience. So I had to make sure, like, I always try to go against the grain, just so that we are like even keeled and more composed towards the center instead of being overconfident, or how the other way, being too scared or too afraid to perform. I think back then it was more about overconfidence that I was trying to push back, and just making sure guys like, yo, be prepared, guys. You know, this is the game of our lives. And for some players, if they were on the other side of the spectrum, that's not the best coaching advice, right? You want to relieve the pressure, but I actually wanted to put the pressure on the players and to make sure that they were on point with their scheduling. And because like one day you have to wake up early for tech check, another day a little bit more reasonable time for media day or whatever. Like it was all over the place, and they can easily just sit in their hotel room and do nothing. So I had to make sure, like, guys, we're running practice.
Right.
We're running practice. Let's go over all our setups. Let's just make sure we just dry run a few things. Make sure we're not like, we don't forget things going to finals, because hey, look, it could be 5 maps. Right. Do you remember everything? Do you remember your subs, Trent? Do you remember your shock lineups or dart lineups or whatever? Like I was just going through everything.
Sure.
But yeah, 3 days is too long.
Just try and keep them busy for sure.
Yeah,
at that point.
Too long.
Makes sense. Okay, so yeah, grand finals. You get another rematch against M80. You get to potentially really kind of even the score and one up them at this point. How confident are you guys coming into this grand finals at this point?
Very confident.
When you see the opponent, yeah.
Yeah, I was very confident. I knew we had this event in the bag, based on our map pool strengths.
Okay.
Particularly our Haven was really good. I didn't think any team in the tournament could beat our Haven. And it turns out Ascent was also there. It was kind of funny that we did lose our Ascent game, our map 1. And yeah. I would attribute that to, again, just the conditions of the tournament or of the stage. At that point, M80 was the more experienced team in dealing with the stage environment. We didn't. In that first half, all players couldn't hear, and we missed a lot of like these scenarios, these mid-round scenarios where we didn't call out a few positions, and that guy was able to get a multi-frag. And normally in the studio or online play, you can merely just hear where that shot was coming from.
Sure.
So like one of the attack timeouts, I just said like, hey guys, you guys have to step up the microcomms a lot, like left, right, center. Like you have to specify everything, because we can't hear. And sure enough, like we go into the second half and mount a comeback. Although we did toss that last round, the last 2 rounds.
Again, we all talk about that.
yeah. I mean, but, like we knew with that half as evidence that we got this. Like, yeah, they can talk their trash right now, but that was just enough evidence for us. Like we are stage ready. Actually, we got a long game. We got a long series to go. We have so many good maps coming up. We got this.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, and then you guys do. You guys end up going 3 in a row to win and ascend into the VCT League. And so my question for you now is, how would you rank the guard if you guys are able to take, I mean, who knows what the offseason will bring, but if you guys are able to take this team, yourself included, going into VCTs against the current VCT's America team, where would you rank yourselves?
This might sound overconfident, because I know the VCT franchise teams, like, they scrim us a lot, and they have their perception of our team. And we do have negative win rates against some of these teams in scrims, but scrims are scrims, and we're not practicing to beat those teams. We're just practicing our own stuff. So come match time, and we're match time players, we can put on the pressure, and we embrace the pressure. Come match time, I think we can beat majority of these teams. I actually, this is my confident self speaking. I think we would be top 3 or 4 in the franchise VCT. Yeah,
I think that's fair. I think I would. I'd give you guys a reasonable shot to make that top 3 and go to a Masters for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. So looking back at the experience in the tier 2 scene, I kind of wanted to give you your thoughts a little bit on just like what the tier 2 scene is like and how you feel like it works as a stepping stone for people. Like is the tier 2 scene in like an okay space? Like was there too much playing? What I guess what was your overall experience of being like, in this kind of meat grinder of a system?
Yeah. I'm glad the season was long and that it gave us opportunity to grow. And we all enjoyed the journey. Going through split 1 and 2. And it was like a 7-month journey to get to that point. As far as like the tier 2 scene goes, I think it's not too sustainable. I hope that Riot kind of ups its path to profitability for the orgs to continue to invest in the scene.
Mhm.
You saw already like some of the fallout. There's no reason for the orgs to keep these players and staff on their payroll for the next 6 months.
Right.
Fortunately, we won. So there is a reason for them to do that, but there's a lot of teams that are just cutting their losses a little bit. So that's not too healthy. There needs to be some incentive, and everything needs to be incentivized. And if you don't properly incentivize the orgs to stay and invest, then they'll just do what they think is best for them.
Right.
And it's no secret that there is a little bit of a esports winter going on, and not to mention the broader macro environment, economic environment, that it's kind of hard to attract investors in this space. It's been a big red mark. So there needs to be a reason for sure to continue investment. Sorry, that was long-winded, but
No, I mean it's true. And another interesting thing in that is that it doesn't really, like, the way that it's incentivized right now is you're incentivized to not really do anything Valorant related until the season's about to start, and then either try and throw together a roster or like wait for a roster to form in sort of like the trenches and then grind its way into a spot and then sign them. I mean, I came from Dota 2 to this, and that's all of North American esports in Dota 2. It's just like free agent rosters grinding through these crazy qualifiers where you have like one shot and 500 team bracket. One team makes it through. That team probably gets signed by an org. But it really is kind of a weird space. I guess, like, what's your advice for players who are trying to come up in North American Valorant right now? Like, what is it? Try and get a group and work for as long as you can, because obviously experience pays a lot of dividends. I think you guys probably had a bit of an advantage with this core that's been around for a while. And we see it with, like, even in the other Ascension leagues, the teams that were formed early and played a lot are kind of the ones that are finding success.
Yeah, definitely. I actually want to first speak to the orgs in the space.
Mhm.
Let this run show that this is kind of a blueprint for success, I think, at least in the tier 2 scene to ascend. This roster was formed in November, and I got to work in December. So it was actually like an 8-month process for me.
Mhm.
And I ran a boot camp in LA in December before we relocated, before the holidays and before relocation to LA. So I started the team building process really early to make sure we were ready in our first match. Like, you can't be ready in like 2 weeks leading up to a match. Like, you need to have a month-long process of just team building and developing that team chemistry and just making sure, like, what's our roles, how do we want to play, and whatnot. So you need to start that process early, and it can't just be wait until again, like, weeks before the season starts and then just pick a team up. Like, I think it'll pay dividends to the orgs if they invest a little bit earlier and give this support structure for teams to start their team building at least a month out before the season starts.
Yeah, that
But
makes sense to me.
yeah, and then for the players in the tier 2 scene, try to be as marketable as possible, be brand friendly, and increase your brand. Keep grinding away, but obviously be reasonable. Make sure you guys have your like plan Bs, in a sense that like don't just all in into this unless you have reason to. I just want everybody to make sure like we all like keep a level head going through this career, because it is super volatile. I witnessed lives changed based on just the conditions of the sport. So just make sure you have a level head going through this, and keep improving every day. That's it.
Yeah, makes sense. I kind of want to get your thoughts on scouting talent just briefly.
Yeah.
If you're a coach looking to sort of like form a roster, or maybe even like pick up a player, like what are you looking at in terms of like, are you looking at like a big agent pool? Are you looking at somebody who's like really specialized in something? Obviously, you know, we can talk about like aim and comms and that kind of stuff, but like more Valorant specific, what are you kind of like looking for in players if you had to scout talent?
I would look at their intuition and like their logic on how they play.
Mhm.
So that's usually through like when they stream. Guys, also please stream, put it on video, because I and many coaches will look and lurk through your stream VODs, and also don't troll in those games, because we can't watch everything. We'll probably pick a random time, watch a game, and then that's it. So just if you're an aspiring talent, hoping to get scouted, just make sure you have good games on video. But yeah, I'm mainly looking at like the logic of how they play. That's on top of like the skill. There needs to be a baseline level of skill to
Sure.
able to perform the ideas that you want to do. And then the next level is just, hey, is there a logic to how they play? And then the next level is like, okay, let's figure out like if you're gonna make a roster, like what pieces do you need to make this roster work? And it can't, like, obviously you want like best available talent, but for roster creation, you need to keep in mind of the personalities and like what kind of, like, how does everybody support each other?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Are there any specific like agents or roles that you think are more important than others? Like is like a Sova player just like absolutely crucial? I mean, with a Trent on your team, it's pretty nice, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think every role is crucial. You can't
Mhm.
have a weak link. And if you see our team, there is no weak link in our
Yeah.
team. Um, Skill wise and just like their role wise. I think each player was pretty much best in slot in challengers. So that's one of the reasons why we had the skill and the talent to make this whole endeavor work. So for aspiring players, like try to hone in on the role and try to figure out, like, break down like what skill sets are required for each role. I mean, obviously I can help you with that, or like some of these coaches can help you with that. But all those little things will be noticed by a competent coach.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And certain people's play style and personality fit certain roles better.
Right. I
I would
actually
say.
have a theory of like, actually the personality kind of pushes you to a certain role.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I've seen some people who are like, "Man, I should just be a jet player because that's where all the best players are." I was like, "Bro, you're really good at lurking, and you're kind of afraid to go in first. So maybe you should,
yeah,
do
you
some
need a killer
scouts instead."
instinct
Yeah,
and just no fear as a jet. You know, there's like, I actually was talking to like one of the sports psychologists in the scene, and I do have a theory of like your personality type sometimes lends its role. And
yeah,
there's no secret why, like, hey, you're a Sentinel player. Why you kind of like leaning on control. I can tell, like,
yeah,
you want to control the game as much as possible, and that makes sense. You're a Sentinel player. Yeah. Or IGLs, like, it's no secret. Like, I when I used to be an IGL, there's a level of like control I want to exert on the team,
Mhm.
right? How else can you call? Um, so generally, you're a controller. Wow, it's in the name, or
Right.
a Sentinel player. Sometimes initiators. I actually think more IGLs should be initiators, but
Interesting.
that's yeah. But I don't think that'll happen. That's it. Initiators, you need a level of freedom to make plays almost outside of the playbook in a way. Like you got to have that creativity, and that's why like Jonah was so good at the flex role.
Right.
Yeah. So I actually recant my statement. Maybe IGLs shouldn't be initiators. Never mind. maybe the more like the passive initiators, like a Sova. Like they're always in the back and just doing like set darts and whatnot.
Makes sense. All right, I just have a couple more questions for you. I guess the first thing I wanted to ask is just like, what's your plans now? Like you guys are ascended. Obviously, it's too early to say. I'm assuming that there's going to be a lot of off-season movings and stuff like that. But like, what are you going to do in the meantime?
First thing, I'm already in the process of this. I'm reflecting on my season, trying to figure out what systems to improve, what were my gaps of understanding. Because in every coach you have limited bandwidth. When I was at Energy, I had a throughput problem of not really taking in the inputs that well. It was really tough actually to say no to so many ideas. Now it's kind of the opposite. I have a lack of ideas because I didn't have a coaching staff, and it was so. I'm hoping next year I have a coaching staff, and I'm able to improve on like some of the stuff that was lacking, I think. But yeah, after that, decompress a little bit, figure out some off-season plans. No plans really. I didn't really think this far. I was so focused on the goal of ascending, like I had no idea what was going to happen after. So it's now's the time to figure it out.
Cool.
I might stream. I might do more of these interviews. I might try to put myself out there more. I feel like I have a lot to offer or provide some value to the broader community. I hope. I don't know. But yeah, I'll just a lot of this is a waiting game.
Sure.
But yeah.
Okay. Well, sure. Let's get you started off on your little platform. So if you had to give some advice to your younger self then, or just the scene in general, go ahead. This is your platform, and you can just speak your mind on whatever you think needs to be improved or what people should be looking at to improve themselves, I guess.
I think for the younger players, make sure you try to lose the ego and try to grow your skill set. I think you need to have a process-oriented mindset and not really look at the result. Although it is a results-oriented industry, paradoxically, if you focus on the process, you'll be happy with the result, right? So it's really hard as a younger person to understand and see that. It's really hard to get that perspective. And if you really need to gain some perspective, just look at history. Valorant isn't the only esport game out there. There's other games, and you'll see very similar storylines and career trajectories. I do this a lot with my team. Like I would reference so and so, and they'll understand like this isn't the first time that happened. But yeah, I think there's a lot of smart people out there. I think one mistake I had early on was I thought I was smarter, but I think it's a double-edged sword, and it just prevents you from really being curious and understanding other people. A lot of like the problems we have in the scene is just a communication issue. Hell, even like the orgs to players, riot to the orgs, or riot to the players, or player to player, coach to player. It's all communication issues. As long as you guys seek to understand, I think it'll be good. But yeah, just keep improving every day. I think just keep reflecting and improving, and then you'll find yourself in a good spot in like a year. At least that's what happened to me.
Awesome. Well, hey, listen, Josh, thank you so much for your time. Super insightful. I'll put your links, your socials down below in the description. And if there's anything else that you want to plug before I let you go, now is your time.
I thank all my supporters, my friends and family back at home, and the new friends and my new family in a way here in LA. Thankful for the guard for believing in us the whole way through. And I hope to showcase like all the new stuff that we showcase our talents next year. So keep following us, keep supporting us. We won't let you guys down.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
GG.
Yeah, GG.